Socrates was called the wisest man alive, and his answer was to insist he knew nothing at all. That is not a paradox for effect. It is the most precise claim in the history of Western thought, and it directly contradicts how you were taught to value knowledge. You were told that intelligence means having answers. Socrates believed the opposite. He believed that most of what people call knowing is a kind of confident forgetting, opinions we absorbed and never examined, held tightly because examining them feels like losing ground. In this video we will examine what Socrates actually meant by wisdom, why his ignorance was a discipline rather than a weakness, and how a method invented in a dusty Athenian marketplace still exposes the shallow certainties we live by. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. Every video here is built around an idea worth your time. Here is the detail that matters. Socrates wrote nothing. Everything survives through Plato and Xenophon, and in Plato's Apology, written after Socrates was executed in 399 BC, we get the line that started it all: a man told he was the wisest, refusing to believe it, and setting out to prove the god wrong. The story begins with a friend of Socrates named Xenophon, who traveled to the oracle at Delphi and asked whether any man was wiser than Socrates. The priestess answered no. When Socrates heard this, he was not flattered. He was confused, because he was genuinely convinced he possessed no wisdom worth the name, and yet the god could not lie. So he treated the oracle as a riddle to be solved rather than a compliment to be enjoyed. He went looking for someone wiser, so that he could return to Delphi and say, "Here, this man knows more than I do, you were mistaken." What he found instead changed the shape of his life. He questioned a politician famous for his wisdom and discovered that the man knew nothing of real value but believed he knew a great deal. That combination, ignorance plus the confidence of knowledge, struck Socrates as the actual disease. He records the conclusion in the Apology, at section 21d, in words I find almost unbearable in their simplicity: "This man thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas I neither know nor think I know." That small gap, between not knowing and not pretending to know, was the whole of his advantage. But this raises a harder question. If knowing your own ignorance is wisdom, why did almost no one in Athens see it that way? The people Socrates questioned were not fools. They were the accomplished men of the city, generals, statesmen, celebrated poets, master craftsmen. Each was genuinely skilled in something narrow, and each made the same mistake. Because they knew their own trade, they assumed they understood the largest questions too: justice and virtue and the good life. This is a pattern you will recognize instantly. The surgeon who is certain about politics. The successful investor who lectures on how to live. Competence in one domain feels like it should transfer, and it almost never does. What Socrates exposed was not stupidity but a structural flaw in how confidence works. The more expert we become, the harder it is to say the three words that begin all genuine inquiry: "I don't know." Consider the modern scene. Someone reads 2 headlines and a thread, and by evening they hold a firm view on a subject specialists have debated for decades. The speed of the certainty is inversely related to its depth. Socrates would not have argued with such a person. He would have asked one quiet question, then another, until the confident structure revealed it had no foundation. That is what makes false certainty so comfortable and so dangerous at once: it costs nothing to hold and everything to lose. And yet the method he used to dismantle it is almost universally misunderstood. Here is the misconception, and it is everywhere. People imagine the Socratic method as a clever debating trick, a way to corner an opponent, expose them, and win. Ask leading questions, watch them contradict themselves, declare victory. I assumed something close to this myself for years. I was wrong. The elenchus, as scholars call it, was never designed to defeat other people. It was designed to purify beliefs, including Socrates' own. When he questioned someone and their position collapsed, the goal was not humiliation but liberation, the removal of a false belief the person had been carrying without knowing it. Read the early Platonic dialogues and you notice something that breaks the winning narrative entirely. Socrates almost never arrives at a final answer. The dialogue on courage, the Laches, ends with no definition of courage. The dialogue on piety, the Euthyphro, ends with the confident expert simply walking away, still confused. If the method were about winning, these would be failures. They are not. They are the point. The aim was to leave a person in a state Socrates called aporia, productive perplexity, the honest confusion that comes right before real thinking begins. I think this is the part people most want to skip, because sitting in not knowing is genuinely uncomfortable. The method does not hand you conclusions. It clears away the false ones so that you can finally see the size of the question. But the city of Athens did not experience this as a gift. In 399 BC, Socrates stood trial before a jury of 500 Athenian citizens, charged with corrupting the youth and failing to honor the city's gods. Underneath the formal charges lay the real offense. For decades he had walked the city puncturing the certainties of powerful men, and powerful men do not forget being made to look foolish in public, even when the exposure was gentle and the intent was philosophical. His defense, as Plato records it, made things worse rather than better. He refused to beg. He refused to propose exile. Instead he suggested that since he had spent his life trying to improve his fellow citizens, the state ought to reward him with free meals. Whether that was courage or something closer to defiance is still debated, and honestly, this is the part that convinces me he meant every word he ever said. He then declared, in the Apology at 38a, that the unexamined life is not worth living for a human being. He said it facing a death sentence. He was not performing wisdom for an audience. He was demonstrating that a life without honest self-questioning was, to him, no life at all, not worse than death, but a kind of death already underway. He drank the hemlock rather than abandon the practice. What his death reveals is uncomfortable. The examined life is not a hobby you add to an already full existence. It is a demand, and it can cost you. Now we can name what Socrates was actually protecting, and it is the thesis of everything we have covered. His ignorance was not a lack. It was a freedom, the freedom of a mind that owes nothing to unearned certainty. A man who claims to know is trapped by his claim. He must defend it, perform it, protect it from every question, and over time the belief owns him more than he owns it. Socrates carried none of that weight, because he had agreed, honestly, to hold only what survived examination. This is why he could face the jury without panic and the hemlock without collapse. He had no false structure to lose. Picture the modern equivalent. The person who has staked their whole identity on being right about something cannot hear a good counterargument. It feels like an attack on the self, because it is. The Socratic disposition dissolves that trap entirely. If your beliefs are provisional, held only as long as they hold up, then being corrected is not a defeat. It is an upgrade. You are not losing an argument. You are losing an error you were carrying anyway. That is the strange power of knowing that you do not know. It makes you almost impossible to threaten, because there is no fragile certainty left to break. The wisest man alive was wise precisely because he had disarmed himself of the one thing most people cling to hardest, the comfort of being sure. Which leaves us with a single practical question: what would you actually do with this? So the whole argument comes down to this: Socrates was not wise because he had answers, but because he refused to mistake confidence for knowledge, and that refusal made his mind free where other minds were captive. The practice is simple and it fits in 3 steps. First, choose one belief you hold with real certainty, about yourself, your work, another person. Second, ask why you believe it, then ask why again, then a third time, following your own answers honestly. Third, notice what survives, and let go of what does not. Do that once tonight and you have run the Elenchus on yourself, which is the only place it was ever meant to end. Wisdom is not the collection of certainties. It is the courage to hold them loosely. These ideas are not meant to be read once and forgotten. They are meant to be practiced. Subscribe if you want to keep practicing. And if you want a daily structure for that practice, there is a Stoic daily journal in the description. 365 exercises, 1 per day. $14. Every book and resource mentioned today is also linked below.